Today on the Deep Dive, we are pulling from just this massive stack of sources. I mean, we've got seminary lectures, historical linguistic research, archaeological data, and some incredibly raw pastoral counseling notes.
Yeah, it's a lot of material to get through.
It really is. But we're pulling all this together to extract the ultimate insights on one specific book of the Old Testament. And our mission today is very clear. We want to figure out how this ancient, seemingly depressing text is actually the ultimate tool for modern ministry.
Right, because it doesn't seem like it at first glance.
No, not at all. Because usually, when you are sitting in a seminary classroom or even just sitting at a pew listening to a sermon, there is this underlying expectation that a theological framework will offer structural predictability.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is almost like engineering, right? If you obey God, you experience immediate visible blessing. If you disobey, you experience immediate visible discipline. It is binary. It's clean. And if we are honest, it is what we all secretly want.
Well, I mean, that desire makes perfect sense psychologically. It is a highly transactional view of the universe, and frankly, it is deeply comforting. Yeah. We like our moral universes to be visible. We want them neatly categorized. If you put the right coins into the cosmic vending machine,
you get the right payout.
Exactly, you get the right payout. But the problem is that when you map that onto the actual cosmos we live in, it creates a very fragile faith.
It really does. Because then you step into the world of actual boots-on-the-ground pastoral ministry, and suddenly that transactional vending machine is totally jammed.
Yeah, it just breaks down.
Completely. You are sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room across from a faithful, covenant-keeping family, and their 5-year-old child was just diagnosed with terminal leukemia.
Right.
Or, on the flip side, you're watching a corrupt executive in your city build an empire of wealth through blatant exploitation, while your most dedicated, faithful church deacon loses his job, his savings, and his home.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. And if you are listening to this right now, perhaps on your commute to the church office or while you're prepping a small group lesson, you probably know this exact feeling. If your pastoral theology is built solely on a surface-level transactional reading of Scripture, the kind where the good guys always win by the time the sun goes down.
It's going to shatter.
Yeah, it is going to shatter upon impact with real-world suffering.
And it won't just shatter. I mean, the shrapnel will actively damage the people you are trying to lead.
Wow, that's a great way to put it, the shrapnel.
Yeah, because the pastoral damage of telling a grieving mother that her tragedy is simply a math problem of unconfessed sin is catastrophic.
It's theological malpractice.
It absolutely is. And this is exactly why God, in his infinite protective pastoral wisdom, did not give us a biblical canon composed entirely of clean, linear proverbs. He knew we needed a pressure valve. So he gave us a biblical laboratory specifically designed to dismantle that kind of shallow plastic optimism.
He gave us the Book of Ecclesiastes.
Exactly, the Book of Ecclesiastes.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. Welcome to our exploration of what is arguably one of the most jarring, perplexing, and ultimately stabilizing books in the entire Old Testament.
It really is stabilizing once you get it.
Yes. So whether you are a first-year MDiv student parsing Hebrew verbs for the very first time and feeling totally overwhelmed, or you are a dedicated lay leader trying to shepherd your community through a season of intense grief, this conversation is custom-tailored for you.
We're going to cover a lot of ground today.
We are. We are going to look at the anatomy of this book, the ancient language behind it, and how it equips us for the trenches of local church ministry. So where do we even begin with a book like this?
Well, to really understand the canonical architecture here, I think it is helpful to use the traditional Jewish analogy of the temple.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Yeah, it's so helpful because it gives us a spatial map for the wisdom literature. If you look at the wisdom books as a whole, Proverbs functions a lot like the outer court of the temple.
Okay, the outer court.
Right. It is the bright, ordered public space of daily life where foundational rules are established. The basic principle is that if you work hard and fear the Lord, you generally prosper.
Makes sense. It's the rules of the road.
Exactly. But Ecclesiastes represents the holy place. You step inside, and the lights are much dimmer, illuminated only by the lampstand. The reflection is sobering.
It's smoky?
Very smoky. The air is thick with incense. Here, you are dealing with the anomalies, the shadows, the paradoxes, and the mysteries of a deeply fallen world. You have to pass through both the practical, foundational wisdom of Proverbs and the sobering, deconstructive disillusionment of Ecclesiastes before you can ever hope to reach the Holy of Holies.
Which is Song of Solomon.
Yes, the Song of Solomon, which represents the intimate, unhindered fellowship we see there.
I just absolutely love that visual.
Yeah.
You can't rush into the intimacy without first wrestling with the shadows.
You really can't.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really grasp what this book is doing to our theology, we have to start with the man who ran the ultimate experiment, who is speaking to us here, and what is the historical ground we are standing on? Because this doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it is deeply rooted in history. The book opens by identifying its primary voice as Kohelet.
Kohelet.
Yeah, it is a fascinating Hebrew term. It translates roughly to the preacher, the teacher, or the assembler, someone who is addressing a gathered official assembly.
Okay.
But the text does not leave his identity ambiguous or anonymous. It explicitly calls him the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And later in chapter 1, verse 12, he states, I, Kohelet, was king over Israel and Jerusalem.
So it's pointing straight to Solomon.
Within a conservative evangelical framework, taking the text's internal claims seriously, these markers strongly point to King Solomon as the historical source and the author of the core discourse.
Right.
We are looking at a composition date right around the twilight of his reign, roughly 935 BC. This is the absolute golden age of the United Monarchy.
And understanding that setting is so critical for the listener, right? Because if anyone in human history had the intellectual bandwidth, the unlimited financial resources, and the absolute political freedom to build a perfect autonomous paradise on Earth,
it was Solomon.
it was Solomon. He is essentially the ancient equivalent of a modern tech billionaire having a midlife crisis. But instead of buying a sports car, he builds massive infrastructure projects and imports exotic animals just to see if it cures his boredom.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
I mean, if he runs the experiment of trying to find ultimate satisfaction purely in the material world, and his result comes back as a flat zero, then nobody else in history needs to rerun the test.
Yeah.
We could just take his word for it.
Exactly. We don't have to repeat the experiment.
But I know from looking at our research stack today that this Solomonic authorship isn't exactly universally accepted in the academic world, is it?
That is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Critical scholarship, really since the Enlightenment, has vigorously contested Solomonic authorship. They don't just question it, many completely dismiss it.
Really? Why?
Their primary argument is rooted in the linguistic profile of the Hebrew text. When you read Ecclesiastes in the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the Hebrew just feels different from Genesis or Samuel.
Different how?
Well, critical scholars point to the presence of what they call late biblical Hebrew features. They point to Aramaisms, and they heavily emphasize a couple of alleged Persian loanwords.
Wait, let's break that down for a second, because we don't want to lose anyone in the linguistic weeds. What exactly is an Aramaism, and why would finding one make scholars assume the book was written hundreds of years later than Solomon?
That is a great clarifying question. An Aramaism is simply a word, a phrase, or a grammatical structure that originates from Aramaic rather than native Hebrew appearing within a Hebrew text.
Okay.
Because Aramaic became the dominant common language of the ancient Near East much later, specifically during and after the Babylonian exile when the Jewish people were deported, critical scholars argue that if a text has Aramaic influence, it must have been written during or after that exile.
So like the Persian or Hellenistic period?
Exactly. Hundreds of years after Solomon died. They also point to two specific words, pardes, for park or orchard in chapter 2, and pictum, for decree or sentence in chapter 8.
Pards and pictum.
Right. They claim these are Persian words that couldn't possibly have existed in Israel in 935 BC. Therefore, they conclude the book is a late forgery, a piece of historical fiction pretending to be Solomon.
You know, I have always found that specific argument so incredibly frustrating.
Oh, I agree.
It's like finding a modern French word in an 18th century English diary and immediately declaring the diary a forgery, completely ignoring the historical fact that the author spent a decade as the ambassador to France.
Right, right.
I mean, Solomon was not living in an isolated bubble. The man was a global magnate.
While your ambassador analogy is on the right track, let me push back just slightly to refine the historical picture, because it is even stronger than that.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't just that Solomon traveled, it was that the world came to Solomon. The evangelical defense here is highly robust and academically rigorous. Solomon's reign was characterized by massive, unprecedented international trade networks. He controlled the major trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. He had diplomatic marriages with women from surrounding nations: Phoenicia, Egypt, Aram.
Oh, wow. So Aramaic speakers were literally in his house.
Exactly. His court in Jerusalem was a cosmopolitan hub of international diplomacy and commerce. It is entirely historically plausible, even expected, that this environment of intense cross-linguistic contact would result in the integration of regional vocabulary and early Aramaic features into the royal court's literature.
So he is naturally picking up the vocabulary of his trade partners.
Yes. And furthermore, modern archaeology has actually vindicated this position.
Really? How so?
Well, for a long time, critical scholars labeled certain words as late simply because they only appeared in later biblical texts. But then in 1928, a farmer in Syria accidentally plowed into an ancient tomb.
As you do.
Right, as you do in Syria. But that led to the discovery of the ancient city of Ugarit, also known as Ras Shamra.
Oh, the Ugaritic text.
Yes. When archaeologists translated the Ugaritic texts, which date back to 1400 BC, long before Solomon, they found that many of the words critical scholars had confidently labeled as late Aramaisms were actually part of a very ancient shared West Semitic vocabulary.
That is fascinating.
So the linguistic argument for a late date is nowhere near as airtight as it was claimed to be 50 years ago.
The ground just shifts right out of the critical argument. But, even if there are a few later linguistic updates in the text we have today, that doesn't destroy the inspiration or the historical core, right?
Not at all.
Like, look at the historical realities of how texts were preserved. Is it possible that a later inspired editor, maybe someone during the time of Ezra, after the exile, simply updated a few archaic Solomonic terms so the post-exilic community could actually understand it?
Absolutely.
While meticulously preserving the actual words, the theology, and the spirit of Solomon.
Yes, that is a very valid conservative position, often referred to as pre-canonical linguistic modernization.
Pre-canonical linguistic modernization. Good seminary term right there.
It is a good one. We see it elsewhere in Scripture, like place names being updated in Genesis so later readers knew where things were. But regardless of whether you hold to pure Solomonic authorship or Solomonic core with later modernization, the historical anchor remains firmly fixed in the Solomonic era.
Because of the context of the book.
Precisely. We know this because the Sitz im Leben, the setting in life, perfectly matches the exact sociological and spiritual crisis of the 10th century BC United Monarchy.
Paint that picture for us. What was it actually like to live in Jerusalem right then?
Think about what was happening to the nation of Israel. For generations, they had been a scrappy, agrarian, tribal people fighting for their lives against the Philistines.
Like farmers with swords.
Exactly. But suddenly, under Solomon, they were experiencing an influx of foreign wealth, foreign philosophy, and material prosperity that they had never seen before. Silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem. This sudden, massive wealth tempted the original audience. The young elite, the royal administrators, the up-and-coming nobility of Jerusalem, to shift their foundational security away from the covenant of Yahweh and place it into material acquisition, intellectual pride, and global cosmopolitanism.
So they were losing their religion to luxury?
Yes. Kohelet is writing to combat this exact historical crisis. He sees the soul of his nation rotting from the inside out due to unprecedented luxury.
So he is launching a massive polemical assault against the self-sufficient, optimistic humanism of his own day.
He is.
And to do that effectively, he can't just write a dry theological treatise. He uses a very specific, highly sophisticated literary structure.
Yeah.
When we open this book, we are not just reading an unfiltered diary, we are reading a framed narrative.
Yes, and recognizing this structure is the key to unlocking the entire book. If you miss this, you will misinterpret Ecclesiastes entirely.
It changes everything.
It really does. The book operates as a framed autobiography. There are two distinct voices at play, which is absolutely vital for proper exegesis.
Okay, two voices.
First, you have Kohelet, the preacher. He is the main character, the subject of the soul's autobiography. He is the one detailing his cynical, horizontal experiment of trying to find ultimate meaning in wealth, pleasure, architecture, and human wisdom.
And the second voice.
Surrounding his words, boxing them in, you have a second voice.
The frame narrator.
And who is the frame narrator? The frame narrator is an Orthodox wisdom teacher. He is the one who introduces Kohelet in the prologue in chapter 1, steps out of the way to let Kohelet speak for 10 chapters, and then returns in the epilogue in chapter 12 to evaluate Kohelet's words and give the final theological verdict for the reader.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm grasping the dynamic here because this shifts everything. Is the narrator essentially playing a recorded tape of a guy who tried everything, letting us hear his total despair, his dead ends, his raw frustration?
Yes.
Almost like listening to a black box recording of a plane crash and then pausing the tape at the very end to look at you, the listener, and warn you not to make the exact same mistake.
I think the black box recording is an excellent analogy, but with one crucial nuance.
What's that?
The narrator isn't just playing the tape of a random fool. He is playing the tape of the wisest, wealthiest man to ever live. He is adopting what we call a methodology of speculation.
Methodology of speculation.
Right. Kohelet intentionally adopts a purely secular naturalist viewpoint for the sake of the argument. His repeated driving phrase throughout the book is tahat hashemesh, which translates to under the sun. He uses it nearly 30 times.
Under the sun, meaning locked into the physical world.
Exactly. He is posing a philosophical hypothetical. What happens if we evaluate human existence strictly within the closed system of the material world, completely isolated from divine revelation, eternal life, or special providence?
So he's intentionally ignoring God for the sake of the experiment.
Yes. Consequently, the cynical, deeply depressing arguments Kohelet presents in the body of the book, like saying humans are no better than animals or that the day of death is better than the day of birth, are not necessarily God's prescriptive arguments for how we should live. They are God's inspired record of human philosophy utterly failing when it tries to operate autonomously.
This is such a critical point for anyone who preaches or teaches this book. Because if you read Ecclesiastes 3.19, where Kohelet says humans have no advantage over animals because both just die and turn to dust.
Yeah, if you just lift that verse.
Right. If you preach that as normative, prescriptive theology without the frame of the narrator, you are basically preaching nihilism from the pulpit. You are telling your congregation that they are just carbon matter destined for the dirt.
Precisely. You have to read the raw, empirical observations of life under the sun through the orthodox covenantal lens of the frame narrator.
It's the only safe way to read it.
It is. And the rhetorical engine driving this entire experiment, the word that echoes through every single chapter, is one foundational Hebrew keyword, hebel.
Hebel.
It appears 38 times in the book. If you look at older translations, like the King James, they usually render it as vanity or meaningless, but that doesn't quite capture the visceral imagery of the Hebrew.
Right, because vanity sounds like looking in a mirror too much.
Exactly. It sounds like pride. But the literal translation of hebel is vapor, mist, or breath.
Which changes the texture of the text entirely. When he says vanity of vanities, all is vanity, he's really saying vapor of vapors, all is vapor. It evokes something you can see but can't catch.
It evokes exactly that. And that metaphor of vapor signifies two distinct rhetorical realities that are deeply critical for pastoral care.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, vapor represents impermanence. Life is fleeting. Think of your breath on a cold winter morning. You see it for a second, and then it is gone. You cannot grasp it. You cannot freeze it. You cannot hold on to it. It slips through your fingers.
Wow.
The wealth you build, the reputation you curate, the physical health you obsess over, it is all vapor.
And what is the second reality?
The second reality is inscrutability, meaning you cannot understand it.
Like a fog.
Yes, it is like trying to navigate through a thick, dense fog. You can see the smoke, but you cannot grip it or systematize it. When anomalies strike in your church, when the righteous believer suffers a terrible disease and the wicked executive prospers and lives to be 90, that is hebel.
It's the fog.
Human logic cannot penetrate the fog of divine providence to figure out God's secret will. We try to build these neat little theological boxes to explain why bad things happen, and Kohelet says, stop. It is fog. You cannot map the fog.
That is profoundly humbling. And the author structurally brackets the entire book with this word, right?
Yeah.
He locks us into this reality.
Yes. He uses a classic ancient literary device called an inclusio.
An inclusio, like bookends.
It's like bookends. In Ecclesiastes 1.2, right at the opening, the preacher starts with vapor of vapors, all is vapor. And in Ecclesiastes 12.8, right at the end of his discourse before the narrator steps back in, he repeats it verbatim. Vapor of vapors, all is vapor. This linguistic boundary signals to the reader that every empirical observation contained between those two brackets must be interpreted under the controlling premise that human effort, when isolated from God, cannot yield any eternal, lasting profit. The Hebrew word he uses for that elusive profit is yitron.
Yitron. So he sets the boundary of vapor, and then he proves it by exhausting every conceivable avenue of human autonomy. He tries wine, he tries building projects, he tries amassing wealth, he tries philosophy.
He tries everything.
And he summarizes this beautifully and terribly in chapter 3 with the famous poem of time. We all know it. Even secular culture knows it from the Birds song in the 60s. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. But what is he actually doing structurally with that poem?
That poem is a masterpiece of rhetorical polarity. He uses 14 pairs of polar opposites, what linguistic scholars call merisms. Yes. By pairing these comprehensive extreme opposites, birth and death, weeping and laughing, tearing and sowing, war and peace, the text uses formal literary exhaustion to prove a devastating point. He is proving that all human activities are locked into a cosmic schedule designed by God.
We don't get a say in it.
No, we don't. We like to think we are the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls. Kohelet looks at that and laughs. He says, you don't control the seasons of life. You are entirely subject to them. It completely dismantles the illusion of human cosmic autonomy.
It is a full frontal assault on the illusion of control. But here's the thing that really stands out when you dig into our sources today. Kohelet didn't just invent this vocabulary of despair out of nowhere.
Not at all.
He didn't wake up one morning, look at his gold, and decide to write a depressing poem. He is pulling his theological framework directly from the very beginning of the Torah. This isn't just rogue philosophy. It is an inspired, rigorous commentary on Genesis 3.
This is where the canonical integration of the book becomes so profound and where we see the unity of Scripture shine.
Yes, I love this part.
The entire worldview of Ecclesiastes is a systematic, experiential reliance on the theological realities of the Adamic curse in Genesis 3. Think about the specific judgments God pronounced at the fall of humanity in Eden.
Right, the curse on the ground.
He promised Adam that human labor would from now on be characterized by painful, frustrating toil. The Hebrew word used in Genesis 3 is itzaban. Kohelet takes that reality and makes it his central technical term for human labor under the sun, using the semantic equivalent amal.
So every single time he complains about the weariness of his labor, the sleepless nights, the frustration of leaving his wealth to a fool, he is pointing the reader directly backward to the curse of the ground outside of Eden.
Exactly. He is saying, I am living in the thorns and thistles. Furthermore, Genesis 3 promises a physical return to the dust. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return.
Which he echoes perfectly.
Kohelet confirms this exact destiny in chapter 3, verse 20. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. The entire book is an exploration of what it feels like, psychologically and spiritually, to live inside the reality of that curse.
That's so heavy.
But it goes even deeper. Even his foundational keyword, Hebel, the word for vapor, is an unmistakable, deliberate literary allusion to Adam and Eve's second son, Abel. In the Hebrew text of Genesis, his name is Hebel.
Wow. If you were listening, pause and think about that. Abel, the very first righteous man in human history, the first man to offer a pleasing sacrifice to God. And what happened to him?
His life was a vapor?
His life was literally vapor. He was cut short by senseless violence, leaving no earthly legacy, no children to carry on his name. From a strictly human, under the sun perspective, Abel's life was entirely inscrutable, profoundly unfair, and meaningless. So when Kohelet cries out Hebel, it isn't just an abstract philosophical concept. It is a name dripping with the trauma of the original fall.
You've hit the nail on the head. Abel is the first historical paradigm of human existence cut short by the curse. He is the walking embodiment of the anomalies Kohelet is observing.
It's brilliant.
But as Kohelet is drawing deeply from Genesis, we also have to recognize that he is fiercely engaging with the broader philosophical milieu of the ancient Near East. He is not writing in a vacuum, isolated in Jerusalem. He is in active, polemical dialogue with the pagan wisdom literature of his day.
Right, and this is a point where people sometimes get really tripped up when they start studying ancient contexts.
Oh, definitely.
They will say, wait a minute. I took a world lit class, and I've read the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. In that epic, there is a tavern keeper, an alewife named Siduri, and she tells the grieving King Gilgamesh to just stop mourning his friend.
Right.
She tells him to fill his belly, wash his clothes, dance, and be merry with his wife. because the gods kept immortality for themselves and we all have to die.
Which sounds very familiar.
It does. And the modern student looks at that and says, that sounds exactly almost word for word like Kohelet's advice in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. So the natural pushback, the skeptical pushback is, are we just reading recycled Babylonian nihilism that somehow got plagiarized and made its way into our Bible?
That is a very common objection in critical circles. But what's fascinating here, when you actually look at the structural mechanics of both texts, is how Kohelet structurally subverts those pagan myths.
He flips them.
He totally flips them. It is true they sound incredibly identical on the surface level. Both tell a man to eat, drink, and enjoy his wife because death is coming. But the underlying theological foundations couldn't be more drastically different.
Unpack that for us.
In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Siduri's advice is rooted in polytheistic nihilism. The universe is chaotic, the gods are petty, selfish, and indifferent to human suffering, so you might as well indulge in physical pleasure as a desperate narcotic to numb the pain of an empty, terrifying cosmos. For Gilgamesh, pleasure is an escape from reality.
But for Kohelet,
Simple earthly joy is the exact opposite of an escape. It is an act of deep covenant faith. It is not a distraction from a cruel reality. It is a direct, inherently good gift from a loving, sovereign creator.
that's a huge difference.
He explicitly says in the text that it is maten Elohim, the gift of God. For Gilgamesh, you drink wine to forget that you are going to die in a meaningless universe. For Kohelet, you drink wine with a merry heart precisely because you know God has already approved your works, he is sovereign over the universe, and he has set boundaries on your existence.
That is a massive structural distinction.
Yeah.
One is drinking to forget, the other is drinking in gratitude because someone is in charge.
Exactly.
And he does this polemical subversion with other ancient Near Eastern literature too, right?
What about the Babylonian dialogue of pessimism?
The Dialogue of Pessimism is a fascinating, almost absurd ancient text. It is a satirical dialogue where a master and a slave debate various actions.
Like back and Yeah, the master says, I will serve the king, and the slave gives a brilliant, logical reason why that is a great idea. Then the master changes his mind and says, I will not serve the king, and the slave gives an equally brilliant, logical reason why he shouldn't. They do this for starting a family, leading an insurrection, everything.
Yes, totally contradicting themselves.
And the ultimate conclusion of the text is that all human enterprise is utterly absurd, contradictory, and the best thing to do is just break your own neck and throw yourself in a river.
Which is a terrible punchline to a philosophical debate. Nothing matters. Let's just die.
Exactly. It is utter despair. Now, Kohelet uses that same structural style of observing polar opposites. We saw that in the chapter 3 poem of Time. But he flatly rejects the Babylonian descent into absurdity.
Right.
Where Babylon saw chaotic, unpredictable deities and zero moral order, Kohelet fiercely asserts that the times and seasons are beautifully, heavily, and securely ordered by a singular sovereign God.
And we see him do this with the Egyptian harper songs too. From what I recall, those were songs sung at Egyptian banquets that basically said, eat, drink, and be merry because there is no afterlife, so do whatever you want, grab the gusto now.
Yes, it was ancient Epicureanism. But Kohelet confronts that directly, especially in chapter 11. He tells the young man to rejoice, to let his heart cheer him, to follow the desires of his heart and the sight of his eyes. He sounds just like the Egyptian harper.
But then he drops the hammer.
He drops a massive theological anvil. He says, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. He takes the Epicurean worldview of his pagan neighbors and binds it tightly with the absolute moral accountability of the Creator. And this brings us directly to the unique, unshakable theology that the frame narrator wants the listener to walk away with.
Which is such a needed corrective for us today because we are surrounded by our own modern versions of harper songs on social media and in pop culture.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
So let's dig into that theology. Throughout the book, if you were reading closely in the Hebrew, there is a very deliberate choice regarding how the author refers to God. In the Psalms or the Prophets, you constantly see the intimate covenant name Yahweh. But Kohelet doesn't use Yahweh. He consistently, exclusively uses the title Elohim. Why does he do that? Is he just being distant?
It is not accidental. It is highly intentional. The use of Elohim, which highlights God as the powerful, transcendent, distant creator, perfectly matches the perspective of life under the sun.
Oh, because under the sun, God feels far away.
Exactly. Kohelet is emphasizing the massive, transcendent distance between the sovereign king of the cosmos and finite, flawed humanity. God has ordered all of history, he has set the times and seasons, yet he remains behind a thick veil of providential mystery.
He's inscrutable.
Yes. As Kohelet says in chapter 8, man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. This sovereign inscrutability commands the reader to completely abandon the arrogant assumption that our human intellect can figure out, reverse engineer, or manipulate God's plan.
It absolutely kills the idea that we can negotiate with God. We treat God like a cosmic HR department.
We really do.
You know, if I do A, B, and C, if I read my Bible, tithe 10%, and go on a mission trip, God owes me X, Y, and Z. He owes me a healthy family and a good retirement.
But Elohim doesn't owe you anything.
He is entirely sovereign. And then the book introduces two major theological pillars that serve as the hammer and the anvil of human experience, forging our character: death and joy.
Let's start with the hammer, death. First, death is presented as the ultimate equalizer. In the ancient world and in ours, we spend so much energy trying to separate ourselves from others through wealth, status, education, or even moral superiority.
Trying to climb the ladder.
Right. But Kohelet points out an inescapable reality that levels all human distinctions. The wise man and the fool, the rich man with a massive estate and the beggar on the street, the righteous person who kept the covenant and the wicked person who ignored it, they all share a common destiny in the grave.
Gusted death.
The dust claims them all. This ruthlessly strips away the pride of status and material security. It forces you to realize that you cannot build an eternal, lasting kingdom with temporary earthly bricks.
I think about this all the time. If you are listening, what does this actually mean for us? It is like playing a grueling 3-hour game of Monopoly with your family.
Oh, I love this analogy.
You strategize, you build houses, you upgrade to hotels on Boardwalk, you hoard all the colorful cash, you bankrupt your siblings. You feel like an absolute king. But at the end of the game, what happens? The cash, the hotels, the properties, the little metal car, it all goes back in the cardboard box every single time.
Right.
Because you can't take it with you. Death is the box.
It all goes back in the box.
But here's the beauty of Ecclesiastes. Because you know it all goes back in the box, you are freed from the idol of control. You don't have to define your fundamental worth by how many plastic hotels you own in this life.
I love the Monopoly analogy because it perfectly captures the futility of accumulation tahat hashemesh. And precisely because it all goes back in the box, it leads us to the second theological pillar, the anvil, joy.
Joy.
Because you cannot control the future, because you cannot beat death, grasping for absolute control is an act of idolatrous worry. True covenant faith is expressed when an individual accepts their finite portion. The Hebrew word used here is helikin, and simply enjoys the immediate, everyday blessings of today.
Let's linger on that word.
The helikin.
The assigned portion. God commands the listener to accept their specific portion rather than demanding cosmic answers, or worse, looking over the fence at someone else's portion. I see this pastoral issue constantly.
It's an epidemic.
People are miserable because they are comparing their helikin to the curated highlight reels of someone else's life on Instagram.
Yes. Coveting another's portion destroys the joy of your own. 7 times throughout the discourse, Kohelet erupts into an explicit, almost desperate command to cultivate joy in food, drink, labor, and family. We need to be very clear. This is not secular hedonism. This is a profound theological duty. God commands you to receive the simple joys of your current season, your current family, your current, maybe unimpressive salary, your current physical limitations, as an unearned gift from Elohim. You find joy in the process of living, not in the ultimate accumulation of wealth.
But if I can push back on behalf of the listener, or maybe on behalf of a suffering church member, here is the massive tension. If death truly terminates the experiment, and we are left only with our limited helik going back in the box, there's a massive theological vacuum left at the end of this book.
There is.
Even if I enjoy my coffee and my spouse today, the grave is still waiting. It begs for a resolution that the Old Testament itself, standing alone, cannot fully provide. Where do we look for a resolution if Ecclesiastes leaves us hanging over this existential cliff?
That is the exact right question to ask, because Ecclesiastes is not the end of the canon. If we connect this to the bigger, redemptive historical picture, Ecclesiastes represents the canonical sigh of a fallen creation.
The canonical sigh.
It meticulously documents the psychological and existential reality of what the Apostle Paul defines in Romans 8.20, when he writes, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope."
Futility.
The Greek word Paul uses for futility in that verse is mariotes, which happens to be the exact word the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, uses to translate our Hebrew word hebel.
Oh, wow.
The book intentionally leaves its questions unresolved on an earthly level to make us long for a savior.
It leaves you standing on the edge of the abyss, entirely stripped of your earthly saviors. Your money can't save you, your wisdom can't save you, your good behavior can't save you.
Yes, and that vacuum, that hollow ache that Kohelet so brilliantly articulates can only be filled by the person and work of Jesus Christ. If death is the final word, then Kohelet's cry of Hebel remains unanswerable and tragic. But as Christians reading the whole canon, we can trace three distinct redemptive trajectories in Ecclesiastes that find their ultimate yes and amen in the New Covenant.
I know this is where the theology really gets beautiful. Let's trace those three threads. If you're taking notes, pay attention here. The first one is epistemological meaning, how we know things, or rather, what we can't know.
Exactly. In Ecclesiastes 3.11, Kohelet observes a tragic paradox. He says that God has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end.
We want to know, but we can't.
We are hardwired by our Creator to crave eternal meaning, to want the grand narrative, but our vision is severely restricted. We are locked in the middle of the timeline, blind to the grand design. We can't see the beginning, and we can't see the end.
Christ changes that.
In the New Testament, Colossians 2.3 reveals a stunning truth. Christ is the incarnate mystery of God, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Jesus arrives as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end.
Oh, that's so good.
What Kohelet could only see as an inscrutable, locked divine schedule is opened in Christ. Christ steps into time to rescue us from our temporal blindness and reveal the Father's ultimate redemptive plan.
He answers the cry for wisdom. He is the wisdom of God incarnate. So that's the first trajectory. The second trajectory is moral, because Kohelet looks at humanity and doesn't just see ignorance, he sees deep corruption.
Right. In Ecclesiastes 7.20, Kohelet states bluntly, "Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins." He looks at the entire landscape of humanity, all the kings and priests and commoners, and sees an unbroken record of moral failure.
Nobody escapes it.
No amount of human wisdom, no amount of discipline can produce pristine righteousness. It is a striking Old Testament proof text for total depravity. The Apostle Paul picks up this exact canonical stream in Romans 3.11 to prove that none is righteous, no, not one. This absolute moral deficit necessitates the imputation of an alien righteousness.
Enter Jesus, the true and better wise man.
Enter Jesus. He arrives in the Gospels as the only historically actualized righteous man. He's the only human being who lived a life under the sun, facing all its pressures, all its temptations, all its griefs, who did good and never sinned, exactly as Hebrews 4 tells us.
He lived the perfect life.
He provides the flawless act of righteousness that Kohelet realized was entirely, hopelessly absent from the human race, and he offers to impute that righteousness to us.
Which leads to the third and maybe the most visceral trajectory, the physical one, the reality of death. Because even if Jesus is perfectly wise and perfectly righteous, we still have to face the grave. Chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes is haunting. If you haven't read it recently, it is a poetic masterpiece describing the breakdown of the human body.
It is deeply poetic and deeply sad. Ecclesiastes 12 describes the tragic decreation of the aging human body. He uses metaphors of a crumbling house. The failing eyes are the women looking through the windows growing dim. The weakening limbs are the strong men bowing.
It's just devastating imagery.
It concludes with the grim reality. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. It is a literal tragic reversal of the creative act in Genesis 2, where God breathed life into the dust. Kohelet leaves us there, returning to the dirt, the silver cord snapped.
But the New Testament doesn't leave us there.
No. 1 Corinthians 15 completely transforms this text. The Apostle Paul acknowledges that the physical body is sown in corruption and returns to dust, but he boldly declares that Christ has risen from the dead.
Jesus Christ entered the dust of death himself. He experienced the full weight of the Genesis 3 curse, the full agonizing decreation of Ecclesiastes 12 on the cross. But he didn't stay in the dust.
He beat the grave.
He shattered the power of Sheol from the inside out. He transforms the grave from a terminal dumpster of Hebel into a seedbed for resurrection glory.
Because of Christ's physical resurrection, when the believer's dust returns to the earth now, it does so in definitive, unbreakable hope of the final resurrection. A day is coming when the mortal will put on immortality. Jesus conquered the sun, which means our toil, our amal, is no longer in vain in the Lord.
The contrast is just breathtaking when you put them side by side. Look at Solomon. He had absolutely everything a human could want. Unlimited wealth, military power, staggering intellect.
The world at his fingertips.
Yet he sank into spiritual syncretism. He married foreign wives who turned his heart away from Yahweh, and he left behind a fractured, divided kingdom that plunged into civil war immediately after his death. Then look at Jesus, the true and better son of David. He had nothing. He had no place to lay his head.
No royal treasury.
No royal treasury. Yet he lived in perfect, flawless submission to the Father's will. And through his poverty, he bought our eternal redemption and secured an eternal kingdom that cannot be shaken.
It is the ultimate cosmic reversal. And because Christ has conquered the futility of life under the sun, it completely changes the stakes for the person sitting in the pew on Sunday. It changes the way we operate on a Tuesday morning in pastoral care. Translating this dense ancient theology into actual ministry equipment is essential.
Absolutely. So let's bring this down to the ground level. How do we wield this in a hospital room? How do we take the profound disillusionment of Ecclesiastes and use it to shepherd a local church? You mentioned earlier how this book shatters the prosperity gospel. Let's start there.
The prosperity gospel is a cancer in the modern church, precisely because it weaponizes isolated verses from the Book of Proverbs while entirely ignoring the theological realities of Ecclesiastes.
They just skip the holy place.
They do. If you stand in a pulpit and teach people that obedience guarantees immediate financial payout, physical health, and a life free from anomalies, you are setting them up for a massive crisis of faith when the real world hits them. We must use Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and 8 to inoculate and protect our congregations.
How so?
When Kohelet says, "There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness," he is giving us the divine vocabulary to handle real-world suffering. We can equip believers to experience tragedy, to lose a job, or face a cancer diagnosis without immediately concluding that God has abandoned them, or worse, that they didn't have enough faith to be healed.
It gives them a biblical grid for a profoundly broken world. It tells them, you are not crazy, the world really is broken, and God is still on the throne. And honestly, this theological grid is just as vital for the leaders as it is for the congregation. When I look at our pastoral counseling notes in the sources today, this book is the ultimate treatment for pastoral burnout.
It really is.
So many of us, especially young guys out of seminary, step into ministry with a messianic complex. We think, I am going to fix every broken sister in this church. I am going to heal every family's trauma. I am going to single-handedly engineer a revival and double church attendance in 2 years.
And Kohelet looks that zealous young pastor right in the eye in chapter 1, verse 15, and says, "What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted."
Yes, you are not God. You cannot straighten what he has made crooked. The fall broke this world so profoundly that your administrative skills, your slick sermon series, and your sheer willpower are not going to put it back together. Only Jesus can do that at the eschaton.
It takes the pressure off.
It frees you from the crushing, impossible burden of needing to control outcomes. You faithfully plant the seed. You faithfully water it. But you are freed from the messianic complex of needing to make it grow.
That realization is profoundly liberating for a leader. It allows you to sustain a lifetime of ministry without turning cynical and bitter when things don't go according to your strategic 3-year plan. Furthermore, this book provides incredible, surprising tools for youth ministry and discipleship.
Oh, youth ministry, that's a surprise.
When you think of Ecclesiastes, you don't usually think of youth group, but look at chapter 11. Kohelet tells the young person, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth." He actually wants young adults to pursue passionate, vibrant, risk-taking joy.
He wants them to live fully.
He does, but he safely bounds that energy by adding, "But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment." It inspires a life of active, joyful investment, but safely enclosed within the protective boundary of ultimate accountability to the Creator.
It's not a puritanical don't have fun. It's have immense deep joy, take risks, plant crops, get married, but remember, you are standing before a holy God. It's brilliant. And we could apply this directly to the lay leaders in our churches too. The accountants, the plumbers, the public school teachers. We can use Ecclesiastes to sanctify ordinary blue-collar and white-collar labor.
Yes. Using passages like Ecclesiastes 2.24 to dignify secular vocations is crucial. We need to teach our people that the primary value of their daily work is not found in accumulating an ultimate earthly legacy that will outlast them, because it won't.
Right. It all goes back in the box.
Someone else will eventually tear down the building they designed. The value is found in worshiping God through the process of daily creation, order, and provision. You receive the physical ability to work and the paycheck you earn as an immediate, tangible expression of God's goodness today.
It brings everything right back to that helek, that assigned portion. Accept your portion, work hard, and leave the eternal legacy to God. To close our time today, I want to ask you for one final thought. For the listener out there, as a peer in ministry, as someone preparing to teach this incredibly challenging, sometimes dark, but ultimately beautiful book, what is the anchor we need to hold on to? When the fog of Hebel rolls into our churches, what is the final word?
The anchor is found in the very end of the epilogue, chapter 12, verse 11. The frame narrator gives us a stunning agrarian metaphor for what this entire book, and really all of wisdom literature, is meant to accomplish in the human heart. He says, "The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd."
A goad. For those who aren't familiar with ancient farming, that's a sharp-pointed stick used by a farmer to poke an ox to keep it moving in a straight line, right?
Exactly. It is a sharp stick, and it hurts the ox. The pain this book causes the reader is entirely intentional. When Ecclesiastes stings your pride, when it shatters your self-sufficiency, when it ruthlessly strips away your false earthly securities and your illusions of control, that is a divine goad.
It's supposed to sting.
It is meant to poke you, it is supposed to sting, but notice the source of the goad. These painful truths are given by one shepherd. The disillusionment you feel when reading Ecclesiastes is not the cruelty of a distant deity. It is a profound act of protective, pastoral love from Jesus Christ, the great shepherd. He uses the sharp sting of Hebel to keep his flock from wandering off the cliffs of idolatry, keeping us moving safely on the path toward eternity.
What an incredible perspective. It hurts because he loves us too much to let us settle for a vapor. I want to encourage everyone listening right now. Let this book strip away your idols this week. Let it dismantle your desperate need for control over your circumstances, your family, or your church. Accept your halak with joy, and let the sting of this world's futility drive you directly into the arms of the Savior who conquered the Son. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Leave here today with a renewed awe for the sheer architectural brilliance of the Old Testament canon, because when you step out of the murky, muddy waters of our earthly reality, when the X-ray machine of your theology seems broken and the world is shrouded in fog, you can rest, knowing that the one shepherd is holding the final results, and he is making all things new.